Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Written in Melanin podcast, where we bring color to your pages, one word at a time. We are writers of color, spreading the words of writers of color, and as always, we're here to talk about books, writing, and everything that happens between the pages. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Written in Melanin podcast, where we are bringing color to your pages, one word at a time. I messed that up, whatever. As always, we are here to talk about books, writing, and everything that happens between the pages. My name is C, better known by my full pen name, C.E. Benson.
And I'm Ashley D.
And I'm Mike.
And today we are here to interview Mike. If you were listening to the podcast last week, you heard him read the first chapter of his book, The Past Lives. And if you haven't, you can go back and listen to it and then listen to this episode of the podcast. Or you can go over to queenmediacollective.com and you can read the whole thing on there for free. Keyword on free. You should do that before he publishes the book and you have to buy it. But, just throw that out there. But all right. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into these questions we have for you. Are you ready?
As ready as I'm going to be.
All right. You want to go first, Ashley? Or you want me to go first?
No, you can start.
Okay. So, you know what? I like to start with the easy questions first. So let's just start there. What do you like to do when you're not writing?
Okay. Well, I like to be a dad, of course, because I do have a 5-year-old little girl named Amani. And of course, we like doing fun things like going to the park or, of course, getting ready for school now, doing her homework. But other than that, I'm a big sports fan. I like watching football, basketball, trying to get into soccer, tennis, those type of things. I'm all into that. And other than that, I like watching movies. And of course, reading articles as well and books and things like that too.
Okay, so what do you like to read?
I like to read mostly articles. I do read books, of course, but I like reading articles on just some of anything, like it would be entertainment or Marvel comics or just sports or anything of that nature. Just like just a breakdown of things, just something that's different from the norm that you would actually read. Because I hate reading the cookie cutter articles that are the same things over and over and over again. Give me something that's different, original. I'll read that probably quicker than anything else that's out there, easily.
That makes sense. Everybody likes to read something original. If you have to read the same thing over and over again, just slightly twisted, that's gonna get old after a while. So
yeah.
Oh, and I did forget. I do actually like to watch Tales as well, which you've probably seen me post all over social media about Tales. Comes on BET. I love those shows.
That's like the skit, right?
It's it's basically where they take a song, like this past week they took Deep Cover with Dr. Dre and Snoop, and they took that and made an actual like a mini movie that stretches over an hour. It had like a Mac Wilds in it. It was really good.
That sounds good. I haven't actually seen it. Ashley, have you seen it?
No, I haven't. I'm actually looking it up right now. I've never heard of that.
Go to YouTube. You can actually look up Tales on BT. Look it up on YouTube, and you can actually see the first season is actually on YouTube.
Okay. Know what I'll be doing tonight.
And let's see, it has 99 Problems, I think was one of the episodes. Let's see. They did the Roots song in Erykah Badu. They did that song last year. Let's see, what other one did they do? They did a few other ones. They did one that was really, really interesting where they actually took, they flipped the world where basically black people were rich, affluent, and everything like that. And white people were, they basically portrayed white people as being living in the projects and trying to still find their way in the world and things like that.
Interesting. That reminds me of the Lupe Fiasco song where he has a song basically the same thing where like if Michael Jackson was black and if Michael Jackson was black, good Lord, if Michael Jackson was white and like some of the major key players of like history were flipped race and what that would look like. I cannot remember the name of it, but I know it's by Lupe Fiasco on, I think I want to say his Lasers album.
I haven't
It's
listened
really,
to Lupe in a really long time.
you should listen to it. Like his Lasers album is probably one of my favorites, honestly. But we're getting off topic. We're here to talk about writing.
So to bring it back, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
To bring it back, when did you first realize you wanted to be a writer?
Well, here's an interesting story about me. My entire life, I hated writing. I absolutely hated writing my entire life. I hated writing in school. Almost flunked high school. Almost didn't graduate because I hated English class, and I barely passed to graduate high school. And in college, I hated it too. But it was actually on a challenge that I discovered my love for writing, which was roughly about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. Riding back from Georgia with my wife, who then was my fiance. And I was listening to Atlanta radio, and they were talking about sports and talking about an article. I can't remember what article it was. And they were basically saying about, the article being horrible or whatever, or being great. And I kept talking about how I could do that or whatever. So she challenged me. She's like, "Wait, why don't you start writing? Why don't you do it?" So got back home, started writing articles, kind of matriculated to different things there. And now I'm doing what I'm doing now, and short stories and writing books.
Wow. I think you're the first writer that I've talked to who's just like, I've always hated writing. And then that changed as I became an adult, because usually the narrative is flipped. Like, oh, I've always been in love with words. I've always been a writer. I always knew that I wanted to do this and I just didn't. But you're kind of like, yeah, no, this wasn't this wasn't for me. I just kind of fell into it.
Well, I was an athlete all my life, playing, football, basketball, did baseball, ran track, did all those things. So, not saying that's an excuse for me not liking English or writing, but it just was what it was at that time, and I never really sat down and discovered my love for it until I actually wasn't an active athlete anymore.
Well, I've always loved writing, but yeah, I can understand not liking English, because I did not like English at all. And I think that happens sometimes with even creatives, because those kinds of classes aren't generally geared toward having fun with writing.
They're not.
I remember I had an English teacher in 10th grade who was just like, "You read so much. You're reading in class. I have to get your attention away from whatever book you're reading. So if you just get your grades up, I will actually buy you books from the Scholastic book thing, the book drive thing." Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll see how I do. But English class was never fun for me.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem with, I guess I would say, institutionalized education. Something you should know about me, I used to be a teacher. So my opinions about the school system are very strong. But basically, I think the problem is that, like, especially when it comes to English and writing, so many teachers focus on the boring parts of it. Like, read this classic from this person who's dead and the writing is really difficult to understand, and write like a 5-page paper about it and what it means. And it's just like, yeah, that's like, I love to write, I love to read, but forcing me to read this really complicated thing that's not even really all that interesting, but you say it's great because it's supposed to be a classic, by 9 times out of 10, this white person that I've may have never even heard of, I'm just like, I'm not into it. But then, like, Ashley, like, if I'm reading something else in class, or if I'm not paying attention or doing something that actively interests me, even if I'm just writing something else in my own style to like entertain myself, being quiet, not bothering anybody, it's an issue.
Yeah.
So
I used to get in trouble all the time. I wrote my first book during classes in high school, and my teachers were so irritated. They were like, "What are you doing?" And it's like, you're getting mad at me for writing in class. Like, how goofy does that sound? But yeah, I think that even with the classics, and I never read an entire book all the way through in high school, and very rarely in middle school, that a teacher gave me. But I think if they made it more relevant to our lives, like Shakespeare, none of us can really relate to Shakespeare. I know I can't. I still can't. And
No.
and I've gotten more into it, but I think I'm more into it now because, now I can say, oh, I can spin this, or I can see how, if I change this or that, how it could relate back to me. Teachers don't do that. They're just like, yeah, read Animal Farm. And it's like, Animal Farm is the stupidest book I've ever read in the whole entire world. It makes no sense. Like, how am I supposed to write a paper on this if I don't even understand what's going on? Like, it sounds like it sounds like somebody's fever dream. Like, what? But yeah, I think if they tried to make it more relatable to students, but they don't. They're just like, read this book and write this paper.
I think my best experience that I had in high school with reading classical books was probably when my English teacher, Miss Gines, teamed up with my history teacher for Black History Month, and we read A Raisin in the Sun. And that was just kind of impactful because I don't know if you guys have ever read A Raisin in the Sun or not, but basically it's about this Black family, and they're trying to, I guess, come up in the world. I know this sounds probably a bad analogy, but if you've ever seen The Jeffersons, it's like the short book version of that before they get to, the Upper East Side or whatever.
Okay.
So it was a really good book, and the connections that she made, she connected it back to things that are actually happening in the news and in real life, and challenging us to look at how society has changed and how it hasn't changed, over the decades since it's been written. I could appreciate that, but that was the only time. But I digress.
Can't get you in the teacher mode, right?
Please don't. Please do not. There's a reason I'm no longer a teacher. Let's just put it like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was fun, but to everything there's, what is it, like the dark side of the moon type thing, the parts that you don't see that are just really dark and shady and like they see the underbelly of the education system. Yeah, no, that wasn't for me. But so all of that being said, we are forced to read these books because, for whatever reasons, society deemed these books successful, right? So I guess, Mike, my question for you is, what does literary success look like to you? Like, do you want to be in school systems, 30 years from now and having children complain about having to read your book? Or, like, what does it look like to be successful to you?
Successful to me is having people just interested in finding out what happens next. What I mean by that is, reading a chapter and like, okay, what's going to happen after this? What's going to happen next? And having, basically someone read your book and not be able to sit it down because they still want to find out what happens in the next chapter, and the next chapter, and the next chapter. And that's what kind of writer I want to be. As you probably, I don't know, people that probably have read my stuff know, I like using cliffhangers and things like that. So that is more my style.
If I had to give you a nickname, it'd probably be the king of cliffhangers.
Yeah.
Because you get to the end and you're just like, oh, what, we're just going to stop here? Okay.
Like, where's the rest? Oh, you just leaving me right here? For real?
Like, this is not okay. But yeah, so if it was in like a physical format, I definitely would have been like that person sitting up, like starting it at 10 o'clock and be like, okay, I'm just going to read this next chapter and I'm going to go to sleep. And it's going to be like 2 a.m. And I'll be like, well, there goes the night. Might as well just stay up because I got to get up in like 3 hours. No point going to sleep now.
Really funny story. I'm actually, with anything that I wrote, I've had people tell me sometimes, get mad at me actually, and send me messages telling me like, why did you end it that way? Why? I cannot believe you did me like that. I'm like, geez,
yeah,
I'm
because
sorry.
when it's coming out week to week, it's cruel. It's cruel to do that to your reader. But I mean, to each their own. No, you're not. Don't give me an apology. You're not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
But that kind of makes me want to ask, like, do you write for yourself or for your reader?
I write more just as an escape, actually. It's just like a big old fantasy world that I create in my head while I'm listening to some album or music or anything like that. And I write probably to get it out for me and to entertain readers as well.
Okay. I guess that's the best way to put it. I don't know any writer who doesn't write to escape in some shape, form, or fashion. So that makes perfect sense, actually. I wasn't prepared for that answer to be so short. Give me a minute to find your next question.
Well, see, then I want to ask you, what is your definition of literary success? Since you posited that question to Mike, what would you say would be literary success for yourself?
I was not prepared to be questioned today. I would say for me, literary success is going to look like seeing my books on shelves and being able for people to read my work and relate to it. So not even necessarily a discussion piece, but like people sharing it and being like, hey, I read this and I connected so much to it. I think that you should read it, And, of course, if I get to be on TV and on Oprah one day and in her book club, I'm not going to turn that down. But I mean, other than that, I really want to reach people. That's what it looks like to me, is knowing that I wrote this thing that people are like, wow, I found this at the perfect time of my life. And it was just this thing that was awesome. And that's not grammatically correct and probably full of filler words, but that's all I got.
Well,
so what about you?
I think it's kind of the same thing for me. When I was a kid, the first big series that I read was called Daughters of the Moon, and I would have never gotten my hands on it if I hadn't seen a friend reading it in class and asked her, and she's like, yeah, you should read it. And then we would like switch books back and forth, and she'd be like, oh, you got to that one already? Well, can I borrow it? And then you can read this one. And yeah, so I think knowing that there are people out there who are sharing my books with their friends. Like, I don't care about the international fame of it. I just like being in high school and seeing the girls who read the urban novels, who are like, oh, you should read this, oh, you should read that, and seeing them shared all over the place and seeing them constantly in people's hands. Being able to see people have my books in their hands and then sharing it with their friends and feeling so great about that book to say, oh, you need to read this. It doesn't matter if this isn't the genre you read. You need to read this.
You need to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. I think I've actually read Daughters of the Moon. That sounds so familiar. I can't remember exactly.
It's an older series, but yeah, and it ended, I think, the last book came out when I was in like high school, like 11th or 12th grade. But it's a really good series.
Okay, I have to go Google it again. Have you read Daughters of the Moon, Mike?
No, I can't say that I have.
Okay, but have you ever?
I was actually I'm like, okay, Daughters of the Moon. This sounds like some kind of superhero book or something.
They're Daughters of the Moon. They're goddesses.
Yeah, they're goddesses.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I remember now.
Yeah, by Lynn Ewing.
I love that once she gets a little bit older.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
They're really good books.
Okay, I'll make a note of that.
There's actually there are brother novels to those books, told from the point of view of the guys in these girls' lives who are, I cannot remember, I haven't read that series, but they also have supernatural powers and they have a purpose, and their stories line with the Daughters of the Moon series.
I remember that. I'm gonna have to Google it now. And oh my God, because you're bringing back memories, but I can't remember the details of it, and it's like bugging me.
Daughters of the Moon by Lynn Ewing.
That sounds so familiar. But okay, I will get hung up on it, so I'm gonna move on. But Mike, like, have you ever had someone like hand you a book and you were just like, thank you for adding this book to my life? And if so, do you remember what it was?
I'll be honest. I've never really had a book that just gripped me and be like, pull me in, like, oh, I gotta read it, I gotta have it. I'm more. I read a ton of articles more than probably I read books, to be quite honest. Now, if you give me an article from the Undefeated, I'll definitely read that all day long. with all the different people that are on that website. I mean, it goes anywhere from sports to just talking about cultural things, everything on there. And one of my actual dreams is to actually be able to write an article for the Undefeated. So I haven't been able to do that yet, but that is something that I've always thought about, always wanted to do ever since I heard the name Undefeated. Of course, minus Jason Whitlock, but that's another story. Yeah, once he was out of there, and the people that are there now, and I actually got to meet the guy that's over the Undefeated at the Super Bowl last year. So I actually got to meet him and talk to him, and so that's one of my ultimate dreams right there, is to do that. And I probably read more articles from there, and some of my friends that actually are aspiring writers as well, I read their articles and books as well.
Okay. So it sounds like you have a writing community, although it's a little bit, I guess, different from the other people that we tend to talk to, because you're like sports and articles, whereas most of the people that we've kind of talked to up until this point, and by most, I literally mean the one other person who's been on the podcast at this point, Joe. She's in like the more of the like story type literary world.
Yeah.
Which is really cool, because there are so many, I think that's one of the things that people underestimate about writing. It's not just, oh, you write fiction, so like that's all of writing. There are so many different facets to it. There, like you said, article writing, sports writing, nonfiction, memoirs, regular fiction. Then in fiction itself, there are subgenres, romance, fantasy, urban fiction. There are all these different realms and communities. And I know for us three, we're very blessed because we're part of the Damn Right Clique as well. And it's like, that's another completely different like community. So
definitely.
Oh,
very diverse. Here. Very diverse.
Yeah. So if you're a writer who's African American and would like to connect with other creatives, we have spots open in the Damn Right Clique. Just throwing that out there. Okay. But okay, so for you, I guess this is for both of you. What is the most difficult thing about writing? Mike, you first, and then Ashley.
The most difficult thing about writing. Well, I think I touched on that on Instagram, actually. The most difficult thing for me is basically touching on like domestic violence situations. Mm-hmm. I don't really like writing about those, even though I know that in some stories they have to be told, but I just generally do not like doing it, because I can't envision somebody hitting my daughter, hitting my wife, or hitting my sister, because I would be behind bars. So I just can't envision all those things, and it brings a lot of emotions out of me, but I have to learn how to channel those into the actual writing, as opposed to harboring those feelings and like, I can't write this or anything like that. You just can't be that way as a writer. You gotta be versatile and be able to touch on things that may not be the most comfortable thing, but can expand who you are and what kind of writer you are.
And the question was, what's the most difficult thing for me to write?
What's the most difficult thing about writing?
Mixing. Because for me, writing is therapeutic, and that's not necessarily how it started off, but that's what it kind of shifted to for me. Sometimes when I'm writing, sometimes mixing those two, so because I write more now, it's for me, but I also write not necessarily because it's therapeutic, it's just fun. So sometimes when I'm not in the greatest headspace, writing can be difficult for me, and writing as a form of therapy can be difficult for me. And I don't know when that started to happen, but yeah, sometimes that can be an issue for me. So I don't write as much as I used to, just because it has become harder, and also because I know it's something that I want to do as a job. That can become difficult as well, because it's a different level of pressure that you didn't feel before, when it was just fun, when you weren't thinking, oh, I'm going to get paid. I might be able to get paid for this. Or somebody might be waiting for this from me. So yeah, I think those two things are the most difficult for me when writing.
That makes sense. I 100% understand what you're saying about it's different when you're doing it for fun versus doing it for a job. Because for me, it's like, this year I started Written in Melanin and like everything that it is, the business, the podcast, putting out my own book, all of it. And it's just like writing now it's like a completely different mindset, because I've had people say, okay, so when's the next book coming out? Like, I need to know what happens with these two characters. You can't just leave it right here. So, and it's like a different mindset than just writing it for fun, But I guess for me, the hardest thing would be kind of a mix of what both of you said, as far as like writing things that I wouldn't normally do in my life and having my characters do that. And for me, like, I guess not being faithful and cheating is something that, since I write romance, is something that happens in my novels occasionally. And it's just like, for me, I'm just like, oh, don't do this. Don't be so stupid. But then I have to suck it up and be like, and write it anyway, because I'm just like, this is how the story progresses. And then also, writing, trying to, make a living off of it instead of just writing for fun and sitting at the computer and being like, oh, ha, 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 I'm going to have him do this thing because it's just fun and I want it to end like this, instead of being like, yeah, no, I can't just have it end after 10 pages. That's no one's going to buy that, But yeah. And I guess sort of, I don't know if it's the last question or not, Ashley, if you have any more, but I guess the most pressing question that I want to ask, that I love to ask, is if you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would it be? And I guess for you specifically, since you didn't want to be like, you weren't like 10 when you decided you want to be a writer, like what age would you go back to tell yourself this thing?
I would go back to when I was in high school, and I would tell myself that, writing doesn't necessarily have to be what's in the classroom, what's told you to write on in the classroom. It can be anything that touches your imagination, your mind, or anything like that. Take those lessons that you learn in English class, the similes, the metaphors, all those things, how to put together a sentence, and put together your own story, your own vision, and it can become something great and wonderful and beautiful. And another thing I would tell myself too is, I'm not a stereotype. I mean, I'm a black male, and a lot of times if you look around America with a black male, you think of an athlete immediately. A lot of times, a lot of people think of an athlete. I can be a writer, I can be anything like that. My parents never really talked to me about any other things. They never really talked to me about, they taught me about playing sports, of course, because my dad was a youth football coach when I was a kid. My mom was just proud of anything I did, and was always there to support me in one way or the other. But nobody ever really talked about, hey, you can do this, that, and the other. The only thing that was talked about was play sports, you can go to college, and you can get your college paid for, which I did those things. But it just was never taught to me about the other things I could expand and be, besides being an athlete, to get pay for my college and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's something our culture could maybe improve on, is opening up those doors and being like, there are more options out here for you than just these things that are readily available. An athlete, or even just the basic things. You want to be a doctor, a teacher, or maybe a lawyer, but if you ask any high school student what they want to be, half the time they don't know, or if they do, it's something very generic like a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer, and there's this entire world of other options to choose from. And even away from those like service things, it's like there are these creative things. You can be an artist, you can be a writer, you can be an editor, you can be a publisher, that you can be so many things that allow you to create, but those things are, I guess, seen as less stable
Yeah. No, you don't
ways
make
of income.
you don't make money that way. My dad was that way as well. He was big into. We had to play sports. We didn't have a choice. Um, I was a cheerleader. I played basketball. I ran track. I did volleyball. Um, so yeah, we had to play. I think it was 2 or 3 sports, or 2 sports in a club. Because his big thing was this is how you're going to get into school. We can't afford to just pay you full ride. So you need to play sports, because that's how you're going to get into school. And both my brother and sister got into they didn't get into college specific only based on sports, but that was a big factor. And then their academics, because my brother and sister are both really smart, and my brother went to law school, my sister went to medical school. So when I told him I wanted to be a writer, he was like, "You want to do what? You're doing what?"
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was a big deal. I got a scholarship, so I had this banquet in high school, and everybody was getting up and saying what they wanted to be, and everybody saying like pre-law, all of these things, and then I got up and I said, "Oh, creative writing," and his face was just like, "What? What do you mean? That's not."
Yeah.
It's definitely a cultural thing.
Yeah, for me, I was like kind of the opposite. Like I did everything that I was supposed to do. I went to school, I got a full ride, graduated, valedictorian in high school, graduated top of my class in college, got into grad school, and then like 3 months into grad school, I was just like, you know what? I don't want to do this. And like I just quit. And my parents were so mad because I had a full ride to grad school, and I just quit and I stayed home and I started writing, and they just like they didn't talk to me almost for like a full year. And
Wow.
I moved away, and then I started teaching because like, I miss my mom and my dad. They raised me and I love them, and they just didn't have anything to say to me. So I got a job. And as we discussed at the beginning of this, that did not go over well with anyone involved. So then quit that, and then now that I'm doing like written in Melanin, and I'm actually like, oh hey, look at this thing that I've actually created, I'm actually doing something with this. They're like, oh, okay, cool. We support this, keep going. And I'm like, yes, finally got that approval. But I don't know where that came from. I'm sorry. I started talking about myself and I forgot why.
Well, I did want to ask one more thing. We did say we were going to talk about the short stories. So past lives. My biggest question about past lives was it's a lot going on. It's a lot of people doing a lot of stuff. And I wanted to know, what made you decide to tell this story specifically? Like, of all the things you could have told, why this one?
Honestly,
I second that question.
Honestly, I have literally no idea where this story came from. I just sat down, turned on some music. Let's see, what did I listen to that time? Oh no! Well, by the way, when I write any of these stories, I just sit down and I put like an album on or anything like that, and that's how I write all these stories. Like I think I was listening to Ari Lennox's album. Yeah, I was listening to her album, and that's how I came up with all these people and all these stories. Just listening to the songs, letting the album play, and I came up with all these different characters. And you got your Ryan, you got your Jade. You got your Jewel. I mean, you got your Janet. I mean, then I brought the mom, and I brought, just everything just started
so
coming to me.
It is. It's a lot. I'm like, who is doing what to who? Why are we doing this? Oh yeah. I started reading, and I'm just like, is this what we doing right now?
Like,
yeah, I created some craziness. I know.
Yeah, it was a lot going on.
If you are listening to this and you have not read The Past Lives, just know that when you read it, because you're definitely going to want to read it, make sure that you are like in your seat and you are prepared. Like, do not go into this lightheartedly. Like, strap in like you're on a roller coaster, because that's about what's about to happen.
Be ready not to move for a little bit, because
yeah, this is not a lazy river type book. This is a full blown take you all the way up to the top and then drop you down to the bottom type story repeatedly.
Now imagine. Now I'm thinking to myself. I'm like, okay, I go back and read some of the stories, and I don't really read all my work back over all the time. I read, of course, edit and all those type of things, but don't really read my work back over. So I thought about some things, and I was like, wow, if I'd have put that in there, that would have been crazy. Do you ever go back in your writing and never do that?
Yeah.
Because I know I do that.
I had a book that I actually started writing for a creative writing class, and I had to go back and reread it every week for circle edits. And I remember my professor telling me one day, he was just like, you got all of these different point of views. If you go back to, if you write from the serial killer's point of view, because that was what, and he was like, you know what, I'm not even going to say that because I don't want you to do that because that'll be really creepy. And then I went back and I'm like, you know what, I would do that. I'm going to do that. So yeah, I definitely go back and read stuff because there's always chances to change things and raise the stakes. And I think that's great. I think that's good to do.
Now, let's see. Let's see if I can name all the albums I've listened to while I've written stuff. I mean, it's just funny. I've listened to like, let's see, East Atlanta Love Letter. I listened to that album. I've listened to that over and over and over again. That's how I wrote. God, I'm forgetting names of stuff I've wrote now. It's just sad. That's
when,
just
when
really
you start
sad.
to write a lot, you forget. I couldn't name all of the things. Like literally, I started writing when I was about 7 or 8. I cannot name to you all of the things that I've written. I don't even think I have. Like even in high school, with all of the things that I wrote, like I don't even know if I still have the notebook. Like I didn't put it all on the computer, so I don't. There's stuff that's probably lost. There's some short stories that I went back and read, and I was like, I don't remember writing this. I don't know what this is.
I think what's really fun for me is kind of like you, Ashley. Like I've been writing since high school. I can't name everything that I've written, but it's just like I go back and read it, and I'm like, oh, this is really good. Who wrote this? And I'm like, oh, that was me.
I wrote something that I never finished, and I'm reading, and I'm like, oh, this is good, and then it stops, and I'm like, where's the rest?
Where's the end?
Like, you never wrote anymore, so
that's it. This is all on you.
Now,
I've gotten to the point where it's like I don't even name my Word documents the titles of my books anymore. I just name them the main characters because I will remember the characters. I will 100% forget the name of the book because, like, keeping promises,
especially in high school, is untitled. Me and titles aren't always friends.
It's just like story 1, story 2.
Now, I'll say for the longest time I struggled with a name for Organized Chaos. I struggled for a name with that one. I thought about it over and over and over again. So, but yeah, with that one,
I actually really love that name.
Yeah, that's a really good name. I'm not a good book namer. I'm just not. I can't title anything, and people are always asking me, what's it called? I don't know. You name it. I don't know what you want it to be called. I don't know. My current book is. It's had so many names, and I'm like, I can't even. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I got to the point where for keeping promises, I was like, I'm not gonna even give it a title. I'm just gonna call it Jason and Camry. Boom. That's the whole story. And I was like, I can't do that.
Oh, I just honestly, with a lot of this stuff, I mean, I think about it from a marketing aspect, just because that's what my college degree was in. So I sit there and think about, okay, how can I kind of tie this into this craziness that I wrote now? That's where I go. I just go off of my mind there, and I'm like, okay. So basically, on the ride to work, probably from the house, I probably think about it, and I'm like, okay, this will work right here, and I write it down somewhere, and I come back to it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's literally how I come up with it.
It never goes that well for me. I named the first book I ever wrote was literally named Pepsi Ryan because I named my title character Pepsi. Don't ask me why I did that. I don't know, 15, but yeah, that's what it was called. I'm like, I can't title. I don't know. This is as good as it gets.
The first story that I ever wrote and shared with people on the internet was called The True Story of Araya Brooks because that's all I had. Her name was Araya Brooks, and I was like, the true story of that sounds good because there was a bunch of stuff like that floating around on TV and stuff like that. So and in books, I was just like, okay, well, this works for everybody else. Let me just go with that. So tragic. The site got taken down, and my dad got rid of the computer it was written on, so it's just like gone. And it was.
I lost the book like, that way.
It was almost like 100,000 words, and it was good. And I was thinking about it the other day, and I was like, "Oh snap! I can rewrite that." I was like, "Nah,
my
I'm not gonna
first
rewrite
book
that."
has 30 chapters. The second book I ever wrote had 30 chapters, and it was not finished.
Yeah,
And it just disappeared.
Wow.
I'm like, what do you mean? Where did it go? I switched computers, some USBs, and I was like, okay, this is not good. Like, it just
it's just
disappeared.
gone.
I have no idea where it is.
Wow.
My best friend was like, are you gonna rewrite it? I'm like, I'm not. No, I don't
No.
remember half of what happened. No, it's lost.
Yeah,
I'll start over from something else. It's lost.
it's gone to the void.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Never
But-
to be heard of again.
right? It's like when you have a bunch of text messages from someone, and then you lose your phone, and you're just like, "Oh, they sent me all these great text messages, and I had them saved, but they're gone now." So, not gonna ask them to resend it. So. Same vibe. But last question. If you could give any advice to writers, young, old, new, seasoned, whatever, your 2 cents on writing, what would it be? And this is for both of you guys.
Okay. The first thing I would say is don't put an age limit on writing. I don't know if you all want to know my age or anybody wants to know my age, but what I'm going to say is that there's never an age limit on when you can discover writing. You could discover it when you're young. You can discover it when you're in high school, college. You can discover it when you're 50 years old if you want to. But there's no age limit on when you can discover writing and what you can create at what different age. And that literally goes for any and everything. And another thing I would say is don't box yourself in. Let your creativeness flow out of you, because you never know what kind of craziness or what kind of great things you can create if you just let it go and let it rip and do what you do. Because if I'd have done that myself and kind of boxed myself in, I never would have discovered the things that I've written or written any of the things I've written now. So, definitely to expand your mind and never be afraid to do that, and don't put an age on anything.
Okay.
So I don't generally give advice because I don't think that I am in a position to give advice, especially writing advice. But one thing, when I was still active on Tumblr, I did write this down because it helped me when I was in a big writing slump. And it's not super grand advice, but I have nephews. I have 4 of them, and it takes a lot to keep them entertained. And so once, when my sister was driving them, she was dropping me off and she was driving them to somewhere. They were a little bit unruly in the back seat. And so I told them, okay, I'm going to start a story, and then y'all get to help me tell this story, because that's what I do. I tell stories. And the story was ridiculous because they're kids. And I had to talk them out of a few things, because it's like, no, you can't put a nuke in space. We're not doing that. And yeah, that's a legitimate thing that one of them said. We can't do that. But yeah, they come up with some crazy things. And so, but I think the biggest thing is to remember how children think. It helps. And talk to kids. If you have kids, if you have nieces and nephews, tell stories with them. It's never gonna hurt. And it's always helped me. And it got me out of a really big creative block. So I think that writers, any age, young, old, talk to kids. It's fun. It's bound to be fun. Even if it doesn't help anything else, it'll keep you entertained. But I think it also helps. So yeah, that's my one writing tip I've ever given.
Okay. I think I would say, don't be afraid of writing. Whatever the obstacle may be, whether it's your family, whether it's yourself, whether it's the fear of failure, whatever it is, like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there, to put yourself on the page, to, be the writer that you want to be, and don't be afraid to experiment with what type of, excuse me, Don't be afraid to experiment with what kind of writer you want to be. So if you want to write articles, write articles. If you want to write fiction, write fiction. If you want to write about a clown in space who has nukes, do that. You know, blow some stuff up in space. No one's going to stop you. It's your story. Just don't be afraid because no one's ever done it, or you think no one's going to read it or no one's going to like it, because I guarantee you there is someone out here in this world who 100% wants to read about a clown in space blowing things up with nuclear bombs.
Yes.
Guarantee you. Somebody's
There's an audience for everything.
There is.
That's
and
right.
People say it because it's true. You know, there's always going to be someone who wants to read it. Now, that audience may not be super big, you know, but it's there. So.
Right.
But I believe that is it for this episode of the Written in Melanin podcast. So we thank you guys for listening and tuning in wherever you are.
All right, that is it for this episode of the Written in Melanin podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Again, my name is C.E. Benson, and I was here today with Ashley D. and Mike Patton. If you would like to support the authors of this podcast, then you can purchase my book, Keeping Promises, on Amazon, and you can read Mike Patton's book, Past Lives, on queenmediacollective.com. You can read it for free there while it's still available. He will be publishing his book soon, though, so keep an eye out for that. We thank you for listening to the podcast, and if you like to, you can follow us on social media at cbensonwright, at writeashwright, and at general_MP. And you can follow the podcast at Written in Melanin. If you'd like to support the podcast, consider buying a coffee at coffee.com/Written in Melanin. As always, there will be links to everything in the description box of the podcast. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, we hope your days are lovely and your books are interesting. Bye!